What's going on, everybody? Teej back again with another video, and today we're talking about Daniel Jeremiah's first 2023 NFL mock draft. I have done everything I can to avoid seeing this. There was one piece of information I did get spoiled for me, which we'll talk about later on in this, but I saw that he put this out right after I finished recording my mock drafts, which came out yesterday and the day before that you're seeing this, so definitely go back and check those videos out. But, you know, hey, Daniel Jeremiah, one of the best in the biz, widely regarded as, you know, one of, if not the NFL draft analyst. You know, him, Kiper, McShay, Jordan Reed, all those guys immediately come to mind. So definitely a guy I have a ton of respect for, and if you're an NFL draft fan, somebody whose opinion carries a ton of levity. So waste no time and start grading this mock, and we start with Jalen Carter. I'm assuming since it's his first mock, he's not going to have any trades. That makes the most sense here, because otherwise the Bears are sitting on a gold mine and not taking advantage of it, because the #1 pick should be Bryce Young. But since this is his first mock draft and maybe he's waiting to see free agency play out, I won't hold that against him too much. So let's just say this is a world where, you know, they're not looking to trade, whatever. You know, let's just take that part out of the equation. Jalen Carter, you know, I think that's the ideal fit. Him or Will Anderson, you can't go wrong. It'd be an A for me. So solid way to start. But again, I just don't think there's any trades in this mock draft, which if I see one later, then I'll change my tune here. Then Bryce Young to the Houston Texans. I mean, what an awesome situation this would be for them. I do think they're probably entertaining, you know, the trade up to 1, but this is also a roster with plenty of holes on it. So can you really forfeit future assets to go get the quarterback? Quarterback's most important position. So if the answer to that question, in your opinion, is yes, I totally respect that. I just look at what else needs to be done. It's like, man, I don't know if I want to really give up, you know, future ones when I could be getting, you know, another potential wide receiver, corner, edge rush, you know, whatever the case may be, whatever that pick becomes. So that's tricky. But in this situation with no trades, Bryce Young falls right in their lap. I think that's the best possible outcome for them. He's the QB1 in my opinion of this class. So ideal situation there for Houston. That would be an A. Cardinals get Will Anderson. They need edge. So, you know, this tends to be, you know, the top 3 in the draft. You know, whoever you have, if you have trades, moving up to 1, it tends to be Bryce Young. Then it's probably a quarterback 2 there at Houston, and then Will Anderson, Jalen Carter. So 3 of the top 4 are pretty much always in Pat, being Young, Carter, and Anderson, and we get them going 1, 2, and 3 here. No complaints from me. Let me get to the Colts, Will Levis. So, you know, the first 4 off the board in my first round of the other day are the exact same first 4 off the board. A little bit of a different order, going to different destinations, but nonetheless, the point stands. And I think Will Levis, in a lot of ways, makes for a good Colt. I know a lot of people are not crazy about Will Levis, and I'm hearing a lot of the same stuff that people said about Josh Allen, which, if you are a Will Levis fan, I am not saying he's Josh Allen. You know, I was just a huge Josh Allen fan. He was the #1 player on my board in 2018. Prior to me having this channel, it was back when I was in college and studio radio station and covered it on the radio show I had every week. But nonetheless, you know, a lot of the complaints of, you know, for Josh Allen, you know, he went to Wyoming. You know, he can't be that good. And for, you know, for Will Levis, it's like he played at Kentucky. The production wasn't great. You know, bad decision making. There's a lot of turnovers in there. But he also just did not have a great ideal situation. I want to mend something I accidentally misspoke on. I kept saying Calvin Austin the other day. Wan'Dale Robinson was the receiver I was referring to. So if you're seeing this video after seeing that mock, I do apologize for having that incorrect. Too many colleges wearing blue and white. But nonetheless, and both Wildcats, right? Right? I might be getting that wrong. But anyways, cat-themed mascots. But nonetheless, Wan'Dale Robinson gets drafted by the Giants in the 2nd round. And that kind of left Will Levis in a situation at Kentucky with no real options to throw to, no legitimate guys that right now are ready to play on Sundays, nothing like that. And the offensive line wasn't very great. And Mark Stoops is the head coach, just like his dad. Bob Stoops comes from a defensive background. They want to win with their defense, pound the rock. Chris Rodriguez, again, is one of the only things I really liked about that Kentucky team outside of Levis. So if he ended up in Indianapolis with Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, on paper, a good offensive line, Jonathan Taylor, shoot, I'm here for that. And he's also a guy who's played for 2 former offensive coordinators during his time at Kentucky. So a guy who is comfortable in an NFL offense. And hey, if he ends up in Indy with those resources around him and his comfortability in NFL offense, don't sleep with the Colts. They can make some noise right away. Let me get to the Seahawks. This is interesting. So no Myles Murphy, not a Brian Brzee. Instead, Tyree Wilson. You know, when I saw something the other day, and this blew my mind away. Tyree Wilson, I don't have to wait for the official measurement, but apparently his arm length is 1 inch shorter than Giannis Antetokounmpo. That is freakishly insane. Tyree Wilson, 6'6", 280, probably 285 pounds, somewhere in that range. And Giannis Antetokounmpo, nearly 7 foot. And even for a guy who's like 6'11", his arm length is insane. So if that is true, that is going to blow my mind. But Tyree Wilson, a little bit of a work in progress, but I think when you look at that Seattle edge situation with Boye Mafe and Uchenna Nwosu, a little undersized, not necessarily great against the run, Tyree Wilson's the complete opposite. And then you're hoping eventually, the pass rush skills kind of come into their own in a year or two's time. But minimum, you're getting a big guy who can set the edge, but can also win with power and with those long arms. So he's kind of the edge rusher Seattle doesn't have. He's also the big body, the strength profile they don't have, and it could certainly help with that defense against the run. Because we saw down the stretch leading up to the playoffs, that team had a hard time stopping opposing run games. And then we get to Devon Witherspoon. Wow, or Devon, excuse me. Going number 6 here to the Lions. That's interesting. So part of the reason I've continued to go Bryan Bresee for the Lions is, to me, it's, Jalen Carter's the top interior defensive line guy, half step down, then you get Bryan Bresee, and then there's a little bit of a drop down before you get Siaki Ika. Now, I feel like I'm one of the biggest Siaki Ika fans there is in the draft community, so I still have a lot of respect for Ika, and I like him a lot as a player, but the reason I've been going Bresee at 6 is because there is a little bit of a step down, even in my opinion, so that's why I've been taking the emphasis. And then on the other side, the cornerback class is pretty deep. Now, Devon Witherspoon, a lot of people have him as CB1. To me, it's Joey Porter. But either way you spin it, those top-end corners, there's also some good options. So if you don't get a Devon Witherspoon, maybe here in the top 10, Akili Ringo, Christian Gonzalez, Joey Porter Jr., Cam Smith, all those guys should be available there in the teens. So with Detroit picking 6 and 18, I'd lean interior defensive line, then going corner, just because that's, I think you're playing the depth of your class and your advantage. But if they did go Devon Witherspoon and his stock rises into a top 6 type of, value, then I can't knock it, because definitely need a corner. I mean, and Devon Witherspoon, if they keep Aaron Glenn around, would be a perfect fit for a lot of man press focused defense, and then pair him up with Jeff Okudah. Ideally, then Okuda's probably moving into that number 2 cornerback spot as he moves into playing wise year 3, and ideally then he's getting easier matchups as well. So I think this pick makes a ton of sense. I'll be interested to see what he does at 18 for Detroit. Other pick, Peter Skoronski to the Raiders. I think this makes sense. I've been thinking about quarterback, but this team also could certainly sign a Jimmy Garoppolo, right? They could sign maybe Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. I just listened to a video from Schefter on Get Up saying it's certainly plausible that he's on the move. So maybe they're looking veteran out, and that's the case. Peter Skoronski, I think, minimum an upgrade there at left guard. But I'd be interested to see, because I think Colton Miller has really kind of bloomed into one of the better left tackles in the NFL. So for me, Skoronski's either going to play right tackle or he's going to play left guard. Either way, I think it's an upgrade. But that being said, Jermaine Illuminor actually started to play really good football down the stretch for the Raiders at right tackle. Now, is that a fluke? Plausible. There's plenty of people who follow the NFL who've never heard of Jermaine Illuminor, so maybe that was just a good stretch and a good day at the office for him down the stretch. But I think Skoronski could be a potential upgrade there, or at minimum, again, a solid guard option with some tackle flexibility if you get into a pinch. So I think that does make sense. Lucas Van Ness, a little bit of a late declaration for the NFL draft. Sounded like he was originally going to go back to Iowa. Then he decides to enter the NFL draft, and his name is hot. I had him in the 2nd round in my latest mock, and I even said then, hey, this guy's probably going to go round 1. I'm still thinking late round 1, like a Dallas, that type of situation. A Kansas City could certainly be in play. Cincinnati, maybe. But all the way up here at 8, man. Daniel Jeremiah knows some stuff, and he's got those connections. He's had conversations with people in front offices. So if he thinks Lucas Van Ness could go top 10, then I might have to start readjusting how I view him and his stock, and I might have to revisit the tape there. Definitely one of the edge guys I definitely need to get back to, but guy with a ton of a nice balance, honestly, of strength and speed, but primarily a guy who can win with speed, comes with inside-out versatility, so especially in a 3-4 defense like Atlanta, you could play him on the edge, or you could kick him inside and play that 3-tech spot, that 3-4 DN spot, and I think he could totally fill either role. So gives you some flexibility for Atlanta, which, hey, if D'Angelo Malone takes a step forward in year 2, you could have him and Ebiketie on the outside, and then Van Ness plays that 3-4 DN spot in a pass rush situation. Or if you're going nickel or dime, whatever 4-man front, he can kick inside and be that interior rusher. So I think he gives the Falcons defense a lot of flexibility, and he's definitely a hot name right now. Then we get to the Carolina Panthers. CJ Stroud falls here to 9. I'm having a hard time thinking Stroud falls. I mean, he's definitely not falling out of the top 10 at this point after how good he looked against Georgia in the college football playoff. Saw him be a creator, right? Doing stuff outside the pocket when the play breaks down, doing it all off script, and he really knocked off a lot of the criticisms me and plenty of others have levied against him. So I think he's a lock for the top 10 at this point, which, Stanfield draft, you can't say anything's necessarily a lock, but to me, feels pretty safe. And furthermore, top 5, because honestly, I'm starting to think Arizona's taking offers right now, because if it's quarterback 1 and 2, and then the options are, let's just say Stroud and Richardson, there's going to be a team that wants to go get CJ Stroud, who's a little bit more game ready right now. So I think Arizona's going to be fielding calls there at 3. And their new GM, Austin Fort, longtime Patriot, director of player personnel. That's a team that likes to trade back, so I could see those roots kind of taking form there. So if Stroud does fall to 9, this is an awesome win for Carolina. I just don't think he makes it this far, but if this were to play out, Carolina would certainly be a big winner from the draft. Then we get to the Philadelphia Eagles. Myles Murphy finally comes off the board. I mean, this would be a great addition for Philadelphia, and it kind of stays true to their identity. They like to focus on the trenches. They want to have defensive line depth, right? And they just made a move for a speed rusher of somebody who, height-wise, 6'4", Robert Quinn, right around that vicinity. A little bit lighter though, but I also think this is a huge win for Myles Murphy. He's not necessarily the most polished pass rusher right now. Really, there's not a whole lot of moves when it comes from a pass rush perspective that he really put on tape at Clemson. He really did lean into the fact that, hey, I'm 6'5", 275. There's not a whole lot of guys built like me that move like me. And he had a lot of success based off of that. I don't want to say a lot, but had some good success specifically as a run defender. So I think minimum Philadelphia is getting a nice guy who can set the edge, but also because he's such a twitchy athlete, he can get in the gaps, right? Like shoot and get to a spot before a tackle or a guard and disrupt a run play. Work to be done as a pass rusher, but I mean, if you're a pass rusher looking to get better, Philadelphia is one of the destinations I would recommend you go to, because they have just had a factory of developing these edge rushers. So I think it's a win for Philadelphia. I think this would be a win for Myles Murphy. I think this would be an awesome selection if it were to pan out like that. Tennessee Titans with Peter Skoronski off the board. Paris Johnson Jr. is the next tackle, and I had Paris Johnson Jr. as my OT1, but it looks like Jeremiah has Skoronski. Then Paris Johnson Jr. I'll be interested to see once he comes out with his player, his big board, and then also his position rankings. But I think this is a win. I mean, I've been saying this a thousand times over. Taylor Lewan, his contract, it makes a ton of sense that he'll be a cap casualty as this team tries to free up some money and move on from some of the contracts that previous GM John Robinson dished out, including Lewan. So I think Paris Johnson Jr., if that were to happen, Lewan were to be moved on from, plug and play, started there at left tackle his first year, holding that spot at Ohio State. He was really, really good. 6'6", 315, great footwork. I mean, to me, he's got to be OT1 because I think the play is already, worthy of that consideration, and then the upside is certainly there. Then we move on to pick 12. Joey Porter Jr. I could see the Texans going corner here, and I mean, you look at a defense with Derek Stingley, who I think has position and scheme versatility, man zone, just because of how good of an athlete he is. But his best stuff at LSU was man press. Go get a wide receiver at the line of scrimmage. And I think that's what Joey Porter Jr. is best suited for. I do think he has the ability to play in zone. We'll see what the combine numbers come in. That may cool my opinion. I've heard some people say that he may not be as good of an athlete as I'm anticipating, but we'll have to wait until we get to Indianapolis. But I still love Joey Porter Jr., a ton of guy who's just gotten better year over year over year at Penn State, has those long arms, 6'2", and again, I think he'll test pretty well. And then you would pair up one of the best man press corners in this class with Derek Stingley, who the best man press corner of last year's class. Sauce may have had a better year, but it's just a different scheme there, so we're not really comparing apples and oranges, or apples to apples there, more so apples and oranges. So, man, that would give Houston a really scary, young perimeter cornerback duo for the future, which, man, makes that defense a whole lot more interesting to watch. Then Broderick Jones to the Jets. So I'm not crazy about Broderick Jones, but this could be a nice situation because maybe there's a world where you keep George Fant around for one more year, or Dwayne Brown for one more year, and then maybe you give Mekhi Becton the season, try to figure out can he stay healthy. And that buys Broderick Jones a little bit of time to get a little bit more polish. I just see him as a bit too raw as a pass protector. I still think he's going to go first round because the size and the strength profile are what NFL teams want. It's just he's a first-year starter at Georgia and didn't have a whole lot of pass blocking sets underneath him, and I think you kind of see that especially against some speed rushers, guys who can get underneath him and work him a little bit. So I just think he's a little bit raw from that perspective. So the Jets could give him the timeline, that 1 year that I think he could need before he becomes, the best version of himself. So I don't hate that landing spot, but 3 tackles in the top 13. That's interesting. And that really leaves Anton Harrison as the only other guy I would say goes first round. Him and Darnell Wright from Tennessee, but Darnell Wright's a right tackle and Anton Harrison that left tackle. So there's really only one other left tackle left here in the first round. But because it is kind of a shallow tackle class, these guys are going to be pushed up the board a little bit. Patriots go Brian Branch, and I've been thinking about my next mock for next week. I think Brian Branch, the pass, is going to be my selection here for New England. He just kind of feels like the next Bill Belichick, playmaking type of guy on that side. And plus Devin McCourty, right? Like, what is that? What is he doing long term? Is he going to be on the team next year in and of itself? Guy who's, mid-30s, certainly could retire. And I think Brian Branch actually makes for a really interesting Devin McCourty replacement. A guy who played in the nickel. And you look at McCourty, this former corner that moved to safety. So you could blitz and he could hold his own in man coverage, right? But he was also such a good instinctual zone player that over the top the dude could just be a ball hawk. I think Brian Branch has a lot of that in his own skill set, more so doing out of the nickel where McCourty was previously an outside corner like his brother Jason. So I love this fit a ton, and he just also is a guy who can move around. So I'd love to see Bill Belichick and his his son Steve Belichick move him all over the field. But I think Branch, not only his coverage ability, his athletic profile is there. I think he could be used as a blitzer. He's also a phenomenal tackler, only 4 missed tackles during his time at Alabama, so he's going to be somebody who can help shore up their run defense. I just think he makes an impact in a variety of areas, so this feels like a New England pick for sure. Then we get to the Green Bay Packers, Nolan Smith. Hey, I mean, I'm sure if you're a Green Bay fan, you're probably sick and tired of seeing my video. Honestly, if you're a Green Bay fan, you're probably not watching my videos because I've just been doing Michael Mayer to the Packers at 15. So here, a little something different, and Nolan Smith kind of feels like that edge rush project that Green Bay likes to take on, like a Rashawn Gary, right? I think Kingsley Enagbare has been pretty decent. Rookie out of South Carolina, they got in day 3, who I thought Enagbare was going to be minimum late day 2 guy, so I was a little surprised by that. But I think they good value on him. But Preston Smith's a guy who's making a lot of money and has had an up and down career. It basically alternates every other year. He goes from pretty good to not non-existent pretty much. So I think Nolan Smith could kind of open up the door to replace one Smith with another, and then free up some money long term against the cap. So I think that totally makes sense. High level athlete, already a really good run defender for Georgia. Obviously the pec injury that cut his season short, but I think based off his athletic ability and the run stopping profile, he'll be a first rounder, and then teams are going to try to crack the code for him as a pass rusher. So I think this is totally in the cards for the Packers at 15. Then you get Christian Gonzalez to the Commanders. Maybe one of the next best, man press corners in this class. 6'2", long arms, going to run 4.3s, minimum low 4.4s. But also with how fluid of a mover he is and how smooth he is flipping his hips, I totally think, if it's Jack Del Rio still there, a lot of cover 3 in his defense, I think Gonzalez can totally play that lane. And it gives that defense 6'2" Benjamin St-Juste on one side and 6'2" Christian Gonzalez on the other, and it just makes it that much harder to try to specifically attack this team over the top. But gives you 2 young, cheap corners where you can spend money on like an entire defensive line, like they might have to do, especially if they re-sign Daron Payne. So that corner duo that has so much upside for the future with the pass rush that Washington already has. That defense looks pretty legit on paper, but you would obviously need Gonzalez and St-Juste to take steps forward. Steelers at 17, O'Cyrus Torrence. Yeah, I've seen a couple mocks. Jordan Reed from ESPN did the same thing. I think maybe even McShay did it as well. I'm not seeing Pittsburgh go interior offensive line. If they're going to go O-line, I think it's going to be tackle. That's why I went Broderick Jones in my last mock. I just think if they did go this route, James Daniels is going to play center, be an upgrade ideally over Mason Cole. But you also have Kevin Dotson there who, yeah, he's had some issues with penalties and hasn't really lived up to what I thought might be there after seeing him as a rookie. So maybe it's just a Kevin Dotson, upgrade. And Daniels can also play right guard. So you have some fluidity and you have some options across the interior. To me, the upgrade to be had is Dan Moore at left tackle. We've given him 2 years and it just hasn't really looked great. Offensive lineman, a lot of times it takes that year 3, year 4 leap. But I just think where Dan Moore baseline is right now, even a leap is just not enough. I still don't think, as a guy who was towards the top of the league in sacks allowed and flags, penalties against. So that's just kind of a rough scene. I just think he's the guy to move on from. So I'd rather see them go tackle instead of interior offensive line, even if that means Anton Harrison here at 17. I'm a big Anton Harrison fan. Maybe a little rich for other people's blood, but honestly, here I'd like that value a little bit more than O'Cyrus Torrence at 17. Trenton Simpson, the linebacker from Clemson, going to the Detroit Lions at 18. This is a pick that I did kind of earlier on, my very early 2023 mocks, but I still like this fit a ton. I mean, I still think this makes a lot of sense. Pair him up with Malcolm Rodriguez, the safety turn linebacker, a little undersized, but then Trenton Simpson has that linebacker body with a safety skill set. All of a sudden, that middle of the defense for Detroit is fortified for the future. And I like him, his ability to play the run. And again, high-level athlete, he can shoot gaps, great in coverage, can play sideline to sideline. And him with Rodriguez gives you 2 guys who can legitimately cover a ton of ground. So I would love that pairing moving forward. And I think here at 18, it's kind of an interesting pairing. So they went corner and then linebacker. A little different than what I normally do, but nonetheless, if you're a Lions fan, that's 2 pretty decent and pretty solid upgrades for your defense long term. So I think you'd be happy if you're a Detroit fan. Then we get to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think this might be the first mock I've seen Emmanuel Forbes in the first round. But hey, 3-year starter for Mississippi State, including as a true freshman, which is always really impressive. 14 career interceptions, 6 being pick sixes, that's crazy. Also, 17 PBUs during his tenure at Mississippi State. So a guy who just got his hands on the football, 6'1", right around 190 pounds, maybe a slight more, maybe 192-ish, but kind of has that frame that you're looking for to play on the outside. And it's Tampa Bay team that has Jamel Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting hitting free agency. I like to see them keep Dean. But I could also understand why there's a lot of other suitors, and maybe that contract just reaches a point that Tampa Bay can't match. Also, if they're moving on from Brady, I don't know how many of these, win now pieces stick around. So Tampa Bay is gonna be an interesting team to see, how much they want to run it back and how much they're looking to start, start a new page, if you will. So Forbes, I like this selection a lot. I don't know if he's, here we got him over Cam Smith, right? We got him ahead of Kelee Ringo. So that I don't know if I'm going to have him ahead of those guys, specifically Cam Smith. Maybe Ringo make that flip, but Smith, I'm not so sure that I like Forbes more than him. But hey, if Daniel Jeremiah does, and he's hearing word from front offices and scouts that Forbes is that guy who could potentially go in the first round, I wouldn't be shocked, because a lot of it does make sense. Young player, 3-year starter, again, got his hands on the football. A lot of it checks out. Seattle Seahawks take Will McDonald. I think this is another guy who, for a lot of people who are casual, draft fans, just trying to see who their favorite team's taken, Will McDonald might not be a name you're super familiar with coming from Iowa State. He kind of had the unfortunate role of playing a position that he'll never play in the NFL. He's 6'3", 236, and that guy is not going to be a 3-4 DN. And that's kind of where Iowa State unfortunately had to play him, kind of playing that 4-5 tag, lining up on the inside shoulder of tackles, when this guy needs to be playing that wide alignment and trying to use his speed to blow past the tackle's outside shoulder. That needs to be his role. So I think for Seattle, get him wide 9, and earlier on we took let me remind, what did we do for Seattle earlier on, because now it escapes me. Tyree Wilson. So we go double edge here, but two distinctly different edge rushers. One where it's like Will McDonald's like pin your ears back, go get a quarterback rush with speed. A potential nice pairing with Boye Mafe long-term. Keep in mind, Uchenna Nwosu only has 1 more year on his deal, so it could be a Boye Mafe as like a DPR, and Will McDonald kind of in the same role, and then Tyree Wilson is the big guy that helps against the run, and then eventually, ideally, you're going to figure out that pass rush, potential that's there. But because of his size, 6'6", 280, he could also kick inside when you go 4-man front and be an interior rusher. So that's kind of a spicy fit, doubling up here on edge. If you're a Seahawks fan, let me know what you think about that. I typically go, D-line, edge, or interior, and then corner. But if you go double defensive line, specifically double edge, how do you feel about that if you're Seattle? I'm interested. I'm open to it. Dalton Kincaid here to the Chargers. Did I miss something? Has Michael Mayer coming off the board? Wow. Okay. Interesting shakeup there. Well, let me explain why this maybe could happen. And the number one thing that jumps out to me off the top of my head is athletic ability. Dalton Kincaid is a much superior athlete to what Michael Mayer is. In a league where athletes rule, that's going to be an important factor. And also, he was kind of the Utah offense. Them and then their quarterback, Loving, I can't think of his first name off the top of the head. He had to do a whole lot with his legs, and those two guys kind of made up the entire Utah offense, at least when I was watching them, and that's just my opinion, so let me know if you differ there. But for the Chargers, man, this could be a nice little Gerald Everett long-term replacement. They do like these tight ends with a combination of athleticism and size. Everett, of course, free agent signing, but also Donald Parham when they drafted him a couple years ago. Could make sense. I just think there's other directions I'd rather see the Chargers go, right? Like speed wide receiver. Let's really unlock this offense. Or Siaki Ika, a big-bodied defensive tackle there to plug the middle and help stop the run. So I don't hate this, but I just think there's other directions you can go. And also, I think there's better players on the board here. Honestly, Cam Smith could be interesting too here. It's this guy who I think makes for a decent, man press corner potentially, but played a whole lot of off coverage at South Carolina. He'd be a really interesting add. Maybe you can move on from Michael Davis long term, but then you'd have, J.C. Jackson, you'd have Asante Samuel Jr., and you'd have Cam Smith that all kind of really fit that zone defense. J.C. Jackson I know was kind of rough this year for the Chargers, but still think there is potential for him in that scheme. That, honestly, would be a route I'd rather see them explore than Kincaid, but that's just my opinion. Then we get to the Ravens. This is the one pick I did see ahead of time, Anthony Richardson, so I'll kind of automatically dispute this. We won't talk about it too much. I think he wrote this and made this. As somebody who has made videos and, prepared right before breaking news essentially drops, or we get a press conference and word kind of changes everyone's public perception. I'm sure DJ basically made this mock when it felt like, and for a while there, it did start to feel like, man, this rift between Lamar and Baltimore is going to end with a tag and trade. It really started to feel like that. And then it's like, okay, well, it's Atlanta, it's the Giants. Who's this team that's going to make the move for Lamar? It's the Jets. And then, you hear the press conference that basically all the wigs for the Ravens, Harbaugh and the front office are like, nah, Lamar ain't going nowhere. We ain't letting that happen. So this was made in anticipation for like, hey, if they move on from Lamar, I mean, like they're gonna have to figure that out. And Anthony Richardson, I think a different runner where, you know, Lamar is kind of a gazelle and wins with speed. Anthony Richardson is much more like Cam Newton, where he can move and he can outrun safeties, but he's also going to lower his shoulder and make a safety regret trying to tackle him, right? So different types of runners, but it could be an interesting kind of comparison. And I also wonder, with this type of selection, did he write this up before Greg Roman had decided to part ways as the OC? Because again, a running quarterback, Greg Roman, that's really his strength. He's not a guy who draws it up well when it comes to pass schemes, but a guy who really has maximized running quarterbacks, Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco, and then of course Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. So I wonder if that news also was maybe not, you know, spilled before DJ wrote this up. But, you know, nonetheless, this is definitely probably not going to happen, or definitely probably not. Almost certainly not going to happen now that it does feel like Lamar is going to be the priority for Baltimore this offseason. So if they get that long-term contract taken care of, this becomes wide receiver, maybe edge, maybe corner, something like that for Baltimore. All right, pick number 23, the Minnesota Vikings, Tyrique Stevenson, another corner that does not make it into the whole lot of first rounds, and another corner that goes ahead of Cam Smith. Interesting. I'd love to see, especially if the Vikings are going to keep Ed Donatell and play a whole lot of soft zone, play off coverage. I'd love to see Cam Smith be the pick. Last couple of mocks, I've gone off-ball linebacker. Don't worry, Minnesota fans. I'm going to get back to getting into the secondary. Corner, to me, is the #1 need for Minnesota, but they could also address that in free agency, so keeping your doors open is never a bad thing. Tyrique Stevenson, pretty solid player for Miami, and I think, you know, maybe didn't wow me as much as I kind of hoped he would, and that just feels like Miami football 101 in a lot of ways. But 6 foot, 190 pounds, has that frame, played on the outside, a lot of football under his belt as well. So totally makes sense. I just think Cam Smith is probably the way I would go here for the Minnesota Vikings. And here's Michael Mayer here at 24. I've been trying to make this happen, and I think I might be able to make it happen in my next mock. But Michael Mayer, the Jags, very different tight end than Evan Ingram, right? Like Evan Ingram basically right now is kind of playing this, you know, he's not necessarily playing the slot because Christian Kirk does that, but they play him off away from the line of scrimmage, and he's just kind of standing vertical, right? So he's essentially another slot wide receiver for them, which makes sense because he's not much of a blocker and he's a really good athlete. So that's kind of the position that makes the most sense for him. Michael Mayer gives you that inline tight end, and honestly, in a world where Doug Peterson's your head coach, and Doug Peterson had a lot of success in Philadelphia with Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, I'd like to see what a world looks like with Jacksonville re-signing Evan Ingram and drafting Michael Mayer. Now, I know that's, you know, we saw how this Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith situation played in New England, so tight end overload doesn't always correlate to, like, really interesting stuff happening. But I think Doug Peterson could be the guy to kind of crack the code and have two distinctively different tight ends, but also take advantage of their full skill set. So where Evan Ingram's this awesome athlete, can run away from linebackers, Michael Mayer is not going to do that because he's not an awesome athlete, but he's such a smart football player, can find the soft spots in zone and will sit and wait. Can also, because he's a crisp route runner, again, kind of like Zach Ertz, where he's not a high-end athlete, but he's a good and crisp enough route runner, can get out of his breaks quick enough, can go from 0 to 100, you know, despite his 100 not being all that fast, in a quick enough manner to get away from man coverage as well. Soft hands, kind of, he's a natural safety blanket. He's kind of an old school tight end in a lot of ways, but I still think he's going to go first round. I'm kind of surprised he's not the first tight end off the board here, but if this were to play out, I think this would be an awesome addition for the Jags offense. Jordan Addison to the Giants. I love this. It kind of feels like Sterling Shepard kind of 2.0, Darius Slayton kind of 2.0, but let's move on from those guys. Let's start anew. Let's give Brian Daboll his version of that. And, you know, Addison, I'm not saying he's going to be Stephon Diggs, but I could kind of see him playing a similar role. You know, I know Mike Kafka is the OC, but I can certainly see some similar parallels where this guy is a crisp route runner. Again, another guy who just gets out of his breaks at almost top speed right away. Smart, savvy player. He's had some drop issues, but I think you can shore that up with some time and some energy and some focus. So would love to see this type of addition. Would like to see maybe someone with some bigger size, right? Like Jordan Addison, not necessarily the most physically imposing wide receiver, but nonetheless, a guy who gets open and could be a clear-cut #1 sounds like an awesome addition for the Giants. Cowboys, Felix Ndike-Uzama, a guy who's kind of pivoted to a second-round edge for me, but I could certainly see it, especially if Dan Quinn is back as the defensive coordinator, just with how much he utilizes stunts and twists. Felix Ndike-Uzama's first step is towards the top of this class. In my preseason edge rankings, I said he's right there with Will Anderson, just maybe a half step behind him. So I had to, you know, kind of compare him versus a Derek Hall and a Will McDonald now that I've gotten to see more of this edge group, how he really stacks up. But he's going to have one of the best get-offs in this edge class. So utilizing him on stunts and twists and having him run by the face of a guard sounds like something Dan Quinn would be really interested in. I've had some mocks where Nolan Smith falls to this spot. And I think for a similar reason, FAU could totally be in play here. And I think late one is certainly not out of play for a guy who maybe didn't have the most insane season at Kansas State, but Again, the athletic profile and the speed will speak. Not necessarily a high-level run defender, but that's why you have a Tank Lawrence there, right? So they already have some guys who are already in the building, plus pass rush rules over run defense, especially if you're a Super Bowl contender and you have an offense that's going to put up potentially 30 points a game, and you're going to have teams playing from behind and throwing against you a lot. So I don't hate that pick whatsoever. Bengals, Darnell Washington. This is one that I've done in my last couple. It gives you basically a 6th offensive lineman, also a long-term tight end at 6'7", 260. May not be the most insane. Like, he's not running 4.4. He's not Kyle Pitts as a tight end, but for someone 6'7", 260, there are a few people who move like Darnell Washington. Not necessarily an insane route tree, but for Cincinnati, considering you have a T. Higgins, a Tyler Boyd, a Jamar Chase who do so much, Darnell Washington, block and release, go to the flat, run straight to the flat, run the seam, run a stick route, 10-yard in, 10-yard out. That's those 5-6 routes might be all he really needs to do, and then be an awesome blocker. And PFF actually had him as a 80+ graded receiver and an 80+ graded blocker. And he actually has pass blocking wins against Gervon Dexter from Florida and BJ Ojulari from LSU. Not many tight ends you could say that about. So I would like that pick a lot for the Bengals. I'm also starting to think offensive tackle could certainly be in the cards. Maybe you move Jonah Williams inside to play left guard. Then you go Denver Broncos here at 28, BJ Ojulari. Edge doesn't really strike me as a huge need for the Broncos. And if you're a Denver fan, let me know what you think about that. I think Barrett Browning coming back healthy next year. Not DeMarcus Lawrence. Randy Gregory, kind of the same deal. Also, Nick Benito, 2nd-round pick from last year, I think really fits in that DPR role. Also, Jacob Martin in the trade at the deadline from the Jets. I think they already have like a pretty decent and deep rotation at edge. So if they add BJ Ojulari, then hey, the rich get richer, and I'm not mad about it. But Ojulari kind of feels like a Nick Benito in a lot of ways. A little bit undersized, speed rusher, played a lot of college football. Ojulari, I think, totally has that late 1 potential, and I don't think Benito ever really got there. So maybe it is an upgrade, and you can move on from Benito. But I think right tackle, maybe number 2 corner, or ways I'd rather go here if I am the Broncos. Maybe even long-term linebacker, like Drew Sanders should be considered here as well. Strong safety, too. You got to find a replacement for Kareem Jackson long-term. Bills go Bijan Robinson. It's always hard to find where that running back's going to go in the first round, right? Like, you don't want to piss off a fan base too much, because a lot of people, I think, have kind of come around to it. Like, yeah, running back isn't the highest position value. It's not the biggest needle mover when it's like, hey, my team needs a corner big time, or they needed an offensive tackle, or what the hell are we doing a quarterback, a wide receiver, whatever. So I know this is tough, but I think for Buffalo, it's like, look, James Cook has been good down the stretch, but Bijan is a better running back. He's a better pure runner than James Cook. But having a rotation with Devin Singletary getting towards the end of his rookie deal, Bijan and James Cook, that is a really enticing running back duo. And that's a team that already has a nice committee worked out between Hines and Singletary and James Cook. But then you add in a Bijan, it's like, that's an upgrade. They already work in a rotation. And then when he's not in the backfield, doesn't mean he has to be off the field. I legitimately think 30 to 40% of his snaps, Bijan can play in the slot. And I know Khalil Shakir had some big catches in the wild card, but limited impact as a rookie. Bijan could be a guy where when Diggs is limited and Gabe Davis is only working vertical, Bijan could be that outlet, that underneath, the satellite guy. And dude, get him in space. Linebackers have a hard enough time tackling him, let alone corners. So this could be a huge potential mismatch weapon for Buffalo. Granted, that all said, for all those reasons, I don't think he makes it to 29. So I don't know how realistic that is, that Buffalo gets to, stick and pick and then draft Bijan Robinson. But if they did, dude, you're getting the best pure run in their class, an awesome addition to that running back, committee, and a guy who can legitimately play out in the slot, be a guy who works underneath, be a satellite guy, be a bubble screen weapon. But as a route runner, I think, anything from the line of scrimmage to 10 yards out, he could do it. Like, have this guy running inside slants. I think he can legitimately do it. Option routes, hitches, even 10 and outs. I think that's in his cards too. So big Bijan guy, and I think he's worthy of a first-round pick despite being a running back. And at long last, I was wondering when we were going to see Bryan Bresee. So, I'm interested to know more about why Daniel Jeremiah did this, and kind of quickly reading this, because again, I haven't looked at this. He's saying, injury history and missing some time this year, obviously with the personal matter too. Limited playing time on his tape. Yeah, I mean, maybe I could see where teams are a little low maybe on Bryan Bresee. To me, he's still a top 10 pick based off his recruiting profile and high-end athletic ability plus his frame. I think based off his size and his athletic ability and a specific, that first step, his speed, he can get to a spot and blow up a run play. I think he can get to an area before a guard can. So I think minimum you're getting a pretty decent, run defender, but there's a ton of pass rush potential there as well. And just like Myles Murphy, he hasn't put a whole lot of pass rush moves on tape, so spend some time, teach this guy, and see what, fruit are bared, or born, bared. What fruit you bear. Yeah, whatever the saying is. But here for Kansas City, let's just say that, let's play down this hypothetical. Talking about a defensive line that has, George Karlaftis, first-round pick at one edge. And then on the interior, Bryan Bresee getting to learn from Chris Jones. Hey, if there's a guy who's going to teach him how to be a force of a pass rusher from the inside, Chris Jones is definitely one of the first names that would immediately come to mind. So, damn, that could be a really interesting spot for Bresee to land and a really interesting addition for the Chiefs. And if they did do this, like, do you consider like moving Chris Jones back out to the edge like they did a little bit a year ago? Not this season they were still playing, but the season before. I don't think he was as efficient there, but man, this would create an interesting combination of potential options they could have across the offensive line. So, and I think, hey, Bryan Bresee, learn from a great interior pass rusher like Chris Jones. That'd be a great move for your career. And then we finish things off with Jackson Smith-Njigba go to the Eagles. I don't hate this whatsoever. JSN's an interesting player because can run 4.5, maybe even 4.6s at 6 foot, 6'1", but he is a really good route runner. He is a smart football player, and he has nice ability to go win it at the catch point. So I don't want to discredit a lot of the things that he does well, but I just think with a limited athletic profile, late first is the earliest I can start thinking about it. But the Giants, getting a guy with some size, I think could make some sense. And here for the Eagles, it's like, you can have JSN, and also this makes sense. Same thing with the team I just pitched a moment ago. Also Dallas, maybe Buffalo. All these teams that run a lot of 3 receiver sets where you can keep JSN in the slot, I think makes sense. So that's the ideal spot for him to go. And then for the Eagles, it's like, hey, we got a whole lot of real estate. Let's throw Quez Watkins out there and see if a corner can keep up with him. Let's just see if we can get the deep ball. Or if you're working maybe in the red zone, JSN and his route running ability becomes a really nice guy and the person you would want then in the slot. So it just allows Nick Sirianni, Shane Steichen, assuming Shane Steichen's back to the OC, just kind of play mismatch. Hey, this is the formation we're going to run. Hey, this is what we need out of this play. Or hey, here's here's where we are on the field. Here's the situation. This is what it calls for. JSN versus Quez Watkins there in the slot. And you're just giving yourself options for an already really good offense. So if you're a Philly fan, I would be on board with this pick, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. And let me hear all your thoughts down below in the comment section. What do you think about Daniel Jeremiah's first mock draft? Do you wish there were trades? I kind of wish there was a trade there at 1, but nonetheless, maybe in 2.0 he'll do something like that. But who's your favorite team? What do you think of the draft selection? And also, tell me what you think about some of the fallers here. Bryan Bresee all the way down to 30, and no Cam Smith here in the first round. No Drew Sanders either here in the first round. Some guys I think are definitely getting the hype. Then you got Lucas Van Ness going to 8. So, some of these moves and selections are something we haven't really seen yet. So I'd love to know what you think about those different moves that DJ did here in his first mock draft versus what I've done. Maybe what the ESPN guys have done. Love to hear your thoughts. Love to talk some football with you down below in the comments section. But that is going to do it for me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. If you're new around here, want to see more draft content, more football coverage in general, hit that big red subscribe button. That is going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.